Hey, this is Corey from Soundslice. Today I'm going to take you through a few quick tips and tricks on creating lessons. Soundslice is a really great way to send lessons to your students either remotely or if you're packaging something together to sell in a course in our store. Before I get too much into it, I would recommend that you take a look at our help documentation. We have a nice page called Tips on Creating Video Courses for Soundslice. This page is full of a lot of useful information that you're going to want to consider while you're planning out your course and especially while you're filming it. I would say the first tip is a summary of this page, which is that you should really be conscious of what the student experience is like while you're filming your video instruction. To give you a sense of what I mean, I'm going to pull up a video lesson. I'll just let it play for a second.
Major. So we have A minor, D7, G major.
As you can see, the instructor is not spending any time talking about you need to make sure your finger's on this fret and you make sure your finger's on this fret. He's playing with the assumption that he's going to be able to include notation in addition to his instruction. So it lets him speak a little more fluidly. Another thing that comes from having your lessons in Soundslice is the knowledge that the student has access to a whole number of practice tools that are already baked in. So you don't need to spend too much time playing the same phrase over and over again because your student can click and drag on the notation to make a loop. You get the idea. You don't need to repeat a phrase over and over if your student can do that themselves. They also have the ability to slow down that recording, even turn on a digital fretboard, or if you're a pianist, a keyboard. So all of this should really free up your speaking and instruction style. You might say, hey, why don't you click and drag this last section that I played for you and play along with it while repeating a few times, or maybe slow this next part down. So you can directly refer to your Soundslice notation in your instruction. It might be a good thing to consider. In addition to optimizing your speaking style, you should also make sure to optimize your visual style. Because the notation is going to exist next to your video, I wouldn't spend any time putting graphics in your video that communicate notation. You know, things that you might see on social media quite a bit. This kind of video with these kind of graphics is going to end up being distracting. The best thing to do would be to cut those parts out of your video or to never put them in the first place. Yeah. So the next tip is to use something we call commentary bars. Commentary bars are little bits of text that you might include in an empty measure of music to serve the parts of an instruction where maybe you aren't actually performing, where there's no notation that goes along with a given moment in the recording. And, you know, that's really common while you're narrating. It's also useful for your students to see these commentary bars as a way of quickly navigating between different parts of the lesson. In this next example, you'll see this teacher is playing and then talking, and then we have a commentary bar to distinguish what's going on when.
In that example, I was playing C minor over the D7.
So it's a really helpful tool to include in your lessons, and you should know that they're available. To do that, in the Soundslice editor, just click on an empty bar, go over to the text menu. You'll see a submenu called bar text. Just go ahead and click on that and type in exactly what you want to appear as your commentary bar. So this is a silly example I've put together myself, and you'll see how the commentary bar helps with provided context. The notes I played in that last line were all coming from the key of F major with an Great. So the last quick tip here about creating good Soundslice lessons is to get comfortable using the syncpoint editor for out-of-time musical passages. If you haven't seen the video about syncpoint basics or the advanced syncpoint features, I would definitely recommend doing that. You can find that all on our help section. But just quickly here, I want to show you what I'm talking about in the context of a lesson. The passages we were looking at earlier, for the most part, use in-tempo music, where in the syncpoint editor, you only need to put in those downbeats. But what about parts of your lesson, like I was talking about, where maybe you're talking?
If it's okay to play a sharp 5 or a flat 5, it's okay to add another alteration to that. And don't forget our rule.
So those notes there weren't necessarily in time, something like that. Open up your syncpoint editor and scroll to that part You'll notice that you can click and drag every single note that you see in the notation so that it matches right up with the waveform. You can usually see little peaks and valleys where a note might be. It's not guaranteed that that's where a note is, but it's usually a good indicator. So now when I play this,
And don't forget our rule.
I have this magical synced passage, even though it's out of time. So when you're creating Soundslice lessons, you should be really comfortable using the sync point editor for those inner bar sync points. So that's it for these quick tips on creating Soundslice lessons. Just to review, I recommend that you be aware of the Soundslice player and tools as you're recording your lesson, that you not include graphics in your video that would be musically distracting or repeated in the notation, that you should use commentary bars for passages where you're narrating and not necessarily playing any music, and that you should be comfortable using the sync point editor for out-of-time musical passages. I do recommend, if you have more questions, that you take a look at our help documentation. That's soundslice.com/help, just to cruise through and see if there's anything we've already answered. But please feel free to add a comment here or email us at feedback@soundslice.com, and we're very happy to get back to you. So hopefully this was helpful. I hope you have a good one.